Hi, folks. So I'm gonna give an excerpt from my book, "The Beautiful West," Amentet Neferet. It's the Beautiful West was the ancient Egyptian name for America, for the underworld, or for the underworld of Afro-Eurasia, whereas America's underworld is Afro-Eurasia. They're both each other's underworlds. in that tradition. And so this is the oldest. I've already shown the segment in an earlier video about the 5,500-year-old Hierakonpolis hellscape, the map that is the oldest detailed map of America that I know of. And that these later maps seem to be based upon that, although with some confusion, because the Hierakonpolis map was flipped around as if it's basically a view of America from underneath, as if you were looking straight through the earth from Egypt. Whereas, these cartographers, these are the books of two ways, the Book of Two Ways from about 4,000 years ago. And they were trying to do a bird's eye view of America, but they didn't realize that the earlier map was flipped around. So they tried to reconcile the two visions of America, and so you came out with some awkward elements, like based on the confused copying of the Hierakonpolis map. They have the Tierra del Fuego pointing like due east, whereas it actually points South America, the southern tip of South America goes in more of a westerly direction. And some of these other elements also derive from the same original mistake, which haunted all of these Egyptian maps for like 1,000 years, and maybe longer. But they kept visiting America, so they would correct aspects of it, but aspects of the original confusion continued to haunt the Book of Two Ways, and perhaps the later Books of the Dead, which were the kind of papyrus form of the Book of Two Ways in some sense. So this is, B2BO. It's the oldest known Book of Two Ways with a map in the coffin of Jehudi Nacht, who was the gnome lord of the Hair Gnome, all the Books of Two Ways are in coffins at Hermopolis in Deir el-Barsha Cemetery. So, and this is, this is a later Book of Two Ways that shows, I'm not sure. I know the image sucks on this phone for some reason. Like, it's actually bright. I don't know why it darkens everything. But I guess whenever you do video on a phone for some reason. But anyway, like it has all the elements here. Greenland is here. The Alaskan Peninsula, the Baja Peninsula, Rio Grande de Santiago, Lago Chapala, Rio Grande, or Rio Bravo, aka the Rio Grande, or the Rio Grande, or whatever. Cuba, Hispaniola, Newfoundland, Chesapeake, Amazon River, Falklands, Baffin Island. So it's like, it's pretty blatant. I feel like the only reason that this one wasn't recognized by more people, other than just that there's, that people, Westerners, don't want to admit that this is the truth, that America is the underworld, and that, that basically modern Europeans are completely and utterly clueless about human civilization. The whole history, like all of human culture, basically, that before Christianity, they have no idea what any of it's about for the most part. But this was turned, like this was up, like West was up on this. You have to read it this way, or I mean, it's usually shown that way because the text is that way. So this is East is down. So because of that, people seeing it that way, I think some people just didn't recognize all this stuff because they're used to only seeing the modern type of map where north is up. So just shows how easily people can be tricked by arbitrary perspectives. So this is the coffin of General Seppi and a satellite map of America. So Seppi was a very important general in Egypt. And so the fact that he has arguably the most detailed map, the one that he actually puts all these underworld gods, he actually illustrates them on the map itself, as opposed to, I think, most maps like B2BO, they just write the labels for each underworld god where they are, and then they probably had separate papyri that actually showed the shapes of each god, whereas this one, he actually puts them all right on the map. And so he was probably there, he was, as a general, maybe he was either establishing colonies or just securing resources, maybe copper from the Great Lakes, or tobacco, cocaine, or embalming fluids, natron, stuff like that. So that's his coffin, and each coffin may be at least partly the product of the person whose coffin it is, who may have, each of these people may themselves have sailed to America and help to expand the knowledge, because a lot of the coffins add new information. So Wael Sherbiny, who's an Egyptian Egyptologist who has written the most comprehensive study of the Book of Two Ways, which was published in 2017, called Through Hermopolitan Lenses. Studies in the so-called Book of Two Ways. So anyway, he writes of the map section, the American map in these coffins, which he himself doesn't recognize as America, but he's basically accurate about everything else about them. He says, the map section is the most famous and the most characteristic of our composition, and it stands behind the modern name of the composition as the Book of Two Ways. It is found in all the illustrated sources, both early and late. Although there are several changes in both the iconographic and the textual arrangement of the material in this part over the years, the main features remained more or less constant. As stated above in our discussion of the design, there are few real spells, to use de Buck's terminology, in this part. The majority of the textual elements consisting of labels and titles accompanying the drawings. So spells are like hymns that are, addressed to the various underworld gods and stuff, the America gods. And so there are real spells on the map, but there are also a bunch of labels. And the spells, I think one of the main points of the spells were they rhymed, they were sung, there was probably dances and costumes to go with each one. And there were rituals to memorize them, and this was how people memorized the way to America and each aspect of American topography, as well as Egyptian topography and astronomy. This is the way that real or, traditional human education was conducted for the last, at least 12,000 years, but probably much longer, probably at least the last 40,000 years, up until Christianity destroyed human civilization. And then the modern so-called rationalists destroyed what was left of it. So the real spells, although a large number of such labels are interspersed on the drawings, the message of this part is not easy to grasp. This is mainly due to two factors. Firstly, the fact that no clear parallels occur in the other iconographic material that hitherto survived from ancient Egypt. Secondly, the sequence of reading the textual and iconographic material is not immediately clear from the sources. We will return later to the problem of the sequence of the textual material. So basically, there is no, as he himself concludes, there's not necessarily a sequence to the textual material. A lot of Egyptologists, give very definite sequences to the text on the map, but what he concludes is that it's a map, so there's no order to read a map necessarily. Like, it's the order that it is in the localities that are depicted. Like if there's a modern map of the US, for instance, you don't like read it starting in California or it's just it's a map. There is no sequence. The enigmatic character of this part of the composition has led several scholars to interpret it in rather an impressionistic way. It has been noted that the textual sources B1, BO, and B4, BO are not in agreement concerning the order of the textual elements. Of the two, B4, BO is not only the richest text source, but moreover it contains textual elements compensating for the missing drawings. So the fact that different versions have different orders of the text, like for instance, B4, BO doesn't even have drawings, it just has text. So it shows that the supposed sequence is kind of arbitrary. There's no necessary sequence of the text. The main feature of this part of the composition in the sources that are arranged in the form of a plan is it's being divided into two large registers separated by a band representing a certain fiery lake. Both registers are characterized by a serpentine band running through the entire register from one end to the other. The upper register has a blue band while the lower has a black one. So yeah, it's saying there's three bands. There's three lines that go from side to side, in its original form vis-a-vis the orientation of the text, with west being up. So there's the upper register that has the West Coast line. Then the middle register has the Lake of Fire, which is just a long red line, or sometimes a white line. And then the lower register is the East Coast, and it's, the upper register is, the West Coast is shown as a blue line. The East Coast is shown as a black line. Although in the original one, both are black lines in B2BO of Jehudinach. This has led scholars to believe, so the fact that the upper register has a blue band while the lower has a black one has led scholars to believe that the former band represents a waterway while the latter is its counterpart, i.e. an overland road. So this being, I guess, the source of its modern designation as the Book of Two Ways. We have already outlined earlier the problems pertinent to this hypothesis. Therefore, we will not discuss here the unwarranted speculations of some scholars concerning the directions and destinations of these so-called two ways, such as how two, quote-unquote, two ways meet each other, or how they and or parts of them end in the lake of fire, etc. Our treatment of the material of the map section will try to envisage it with its two registers as one whole and not as two completely separate partitions. So again, he's 100% correct. There's some Egyptologists who treated it as two separate, design, like two separate drawings showing completely separate roads or 2 ways. But what he's saying is the whole thing is a map. It's one composite whole instead of not as 2 completely separate partitions. This is General Seppi. So he was one of the most important generals of his time in Egypt, and he left us the one of the most important maps, the illustrated map. B1C. Sherbiny writes, among other unclear things denoting places, there is mention of the place of sand and a number of basins or lakes. The textual elements written on the blue serpentine band make mention of towns and again ways, e.g. 8, the towns of the ones who live on dates, 16, the towns of the knife wielders, 20, this is its road, you should not pass on it, 22, the way of the fiery ones. Several interpretations have been given to these drawings, e.g. mounds, towns, gates, enclosures, or buildings. These drawings thus represent localities, whether areas or regions such as towns, mounds, or architectural constructions. For the sake of convenience, we will designate these drawings in general as localities. One may compare the representations of the localities we are discussing here with the oval shapes representing towns in the famous illustration of the field of offering in the Deir el-Barsha coffins. Solely on the basis of the accompanying text, we know that the oval shapes represent towns. In other words, the drawings may not be realistic as one might expect, but stylized depictions. And this is actually one of the reasons for their being difficult to understand. Sherbiny writes, it is clear that CT 451 deals with the entry of the ritualist to the west on his way to Osiris. So he's talking about that these ovals represent towns, and the text indicates it. And so that proves that, the Book of Two Ways uses stylized, or that these, coffins, the illustrations in these coffins are sometimes stylized as opposed to realistic. That's also from General Seppi's coffin. In the B5C version, the map section is between 2 long blue lines, the same color of blue used in the Pacific coastline, but the rest of the ocean is not colored in. The earliest illustrated version of the Book of Two Ways, called B2BO, has a wider Florida than the later B3C has, and Honduras, Nicaragua, and Tierra del Fuego extend much further east than is currently the case, which may in part reflect an earlier shape of America when the sea level was much lower. Newt, oh damn, Nut, I thought it was about the goddess Newt, who's spelled that way. All right, you guys didn't see that. But most of these discrepancies seem to be due to confusion in the copying of the Hierakonpolis map or another of its type by copiers who are unaware that it is flipped like a modern Antipodes map, modern Antipodes map. I've been pronouncing this Antipodes, but apparently it's Antipodes. So they mistook the eastern coast for the western coast and vice versa. So yeah, I added this part recently, so that's why I hadn't even screwed it up. Hope I don't have more like that. Greenland contains the text. All right. So Greenland contains the text. The entrance of the lake. This is the gateway of darkness. That fits Greenland as being a place which is dark much of the year, and likely relates to the tradition about the sunset extinguishing Re's light until he is resurrected inside his shrine in the underworld. So Re is the sun. Americans usually call him Ra, but his name was Re. So he is resurrected inside his shrine in America at Egypt's midnight, ready to shine again on the eastern hemisphere for the next day. This wasn't a literal belief, at least by the adept, but a cosmological device and a mythological device which tend to overlap. Due to this tradition, the eastern coastline of America is a thick black line, and Greenland is a solidly black semicircle, while the western coastline of America is blue. This dichotomy represents night and day, darkness and sunshine. This implies that both lines represent water, and the eastern sea is black for lack of sunshine. Sherbiny writes, in the course of our translation of the texts of our composition, we will use the conventional renderings of the word ruad, such as gate, gateway, or gate hall. This brings to mind the etymological connection between hell and hall, which have the same basic meaning and origin. In Nordic tradition, there are 9 hells which are accessed by traveling northwest, like the route described by Plutarch to Iceland and Greenland and onward to America. So, like in actual Nordic tradition, hell was often seen as a very positive place. It was, and a goddess, just like the Egyptians. For the Egyptians, America was a goddess named Amentet Neferet, the beautiful West, and Nordic and Germanic people referred to America as Hel, our queen, because they worshipped America as a goddess. So this again is Sherbiny's map, and this is a map showing like the accurate shape of Greenland, which is pretty close there. So that kind of wonder if this might have been, maybe there was more ice on this originally, and this island might have been originally included as part of Greenland. Not sure. Anyway, 2 straight-edge shapes to the north of North America are labeled fire, and in later versions, the eastern one is labeled gateway of fire. Sherbiny writes of these 2 sections. The color of the representations of the gates is white in the early sources and red in the late ones. In B1c, Sherbiny's map, the gateway of fire extends from the eastern coast of Greenland to the eastern edge of the map and northward to the eastern corner of the northern rectangle of the entourages of fire. So the entourages of fire, that's a white or red square, depending on which version, that is shown to the north of America, and it may represent the course of the sun and or other heavenly bodies, and possibly like the 4 directions of the earth. So there's this shape, this gateway of fire that connects to that. And the western one is north, and the western gateway of fire is north of Alaska and western Canada, connected by 2 red lines to the Red Lake of Fire, which runs north-south through America. And then this gateway of fire extends north to the western corner of the northern rectangle of the entourages of the fire, and west to just shy of the edge of the map. The fire labels likely relate to the sun, and these eastern and western fire shapes likely are or relate to sunset and sunrise, respectively. Sherbiny writes, for the positive connotation of fire and to the degree that the officiant hopes to be identified with it, see Charles Jacques something, I don't know, pertinent notes, voyage. Baffin Island is depicted in B1c in General Seppi's map as a zoomorphic god with horns like those of a ram, and it is labeled, he who repels the demolishers. To the right is the text, this is an utterance for passing by him. Above that is the spell, look, this Osiris, so the protagonist, who is the deceased, in that case, it's General Seppi, is also called Osiris. So it says, look, this Osiris Seppi, or this Osiris Jehudinacht, because Osiris seems to be Afro-Eurasia. So anybody from Afro-Eurasia is Osiris by default. Look, this Osiris has come in his dignity of Shu. This Osiris has treated Osiris. Make way for this Osiris. So this means like back in Egypt, Sepi and Jehudinach, they basically did something that was seen as treating the earth, treating Afro-Eurasia's, helping to ensure the health of Afro-Eurasia, either something ritualistic or something material, or both. Make way for this Osiris. This, and Shu is kind of like, might be basically Atlas. Shu holds up the heavens. So I think the pillars of Shu, I think, are probably near the poles. So that might be because we're north of America, we're near the North Pole, and it was just referring in previous texts near the entourages of fire to the wizard poles or something like that, which may mean the North Pole. So that's why the dignity of Shu may refer to one of the pillars that holds up the heavens near the North Pole. This Osiris has treated Osiris. Make way for this Osiris. This Osiris shall see what he has treated in Osiris, that his flesh may not swell up. Let your hand hit your forehead, for what is in the hand of this Osiris are the maces of Re. Withdraw yourself. Or this, Sherbiny writes, or this Osiris has come as the dignitary or with the insignia of Shu. B4C reads, in or with this Osiris ends dignity and is for the name, because we're just giving the standardized one, but each coffin has a separate name. This Osiris ends dignity or insignia of Shu. B1BO and B6C omit this symbol before. This prompted Lesko to render B6C as I have come that I may ennoble Shu, and B1BO as this end came after this end had ennobled Shu. Sherbiny Sherbiny writes, or and his flesh should not swell up. Following the text of B4BO and partly B3C and B4C. Okay, I'm not sure what that means. I have to double check that I copied that right. An alternative rendering with the imperative is equally possible. Don't let his flesh swell up, literally get high. B4BO, B34C, B12BO, B6C. However, these ones, however, have an enigmatic text. Don't be high in his flesh. B4BO reads, his flesh should not swell up, literally become high. Sherbiny writes, perhaps the passage was merely an archaic epithet of Osiris that read something like, he who is in the hill of his flesh. So his flesh is probably the earth, like at least the Afro-Eurasian land. Shu, like Atlas, holds up Nut, the sky goddess. This text may be indicating the North Pole, which may have been the location of one of the pillars of Shu. Sherbiny writes of the East Coast. There is abundant evidence that the bends of the Black Serpentine band belong to a lake. So, roughly speaking, it's a body of water. I think it's a loose translation. So this quote-unquote lake is the Atlantic Ocean. And again, he says the curves of the black line are windings of a lake. So yeah, they are the border between water and land. A large body of water and a large landmass. D. Mueller reached the same conclusion, another Egyptologist. So this is a close-up of, you can see Greenland here with the red text in it. You can see Baffin Islands. This is the Great Lakes god. And you can see a little bit of Newfoundland there. And you can see this gateway of fire and gateway of darkness. Detail from Sepi's map. It is possible that Baffin Island was the inspiration for the depiction of the guardians of the underworld.